I think all of you would find this really interesting. I sat down with Sean Kelly of the Digital Social Hour for, well, an hour and went through, honestly, more extensively than I am rarely able to do, a bunch of my political views, addressed him as a Trump supporter, and some of his views reacted to the results of the election. And so for our podcast listeners, this will be the rest of today's show. For all of you watching on YouTube, you can watch it as much as you'd like. A really interesting discussion, again, with someone, Sean Kelly, who identifies himself as a supporter of Donald Trump's. It was on his show, the Digital Social Hour, and take a look. I was really proud of how, at large, you have your crazies always, but we really do believe and stand by the fact that Trump is threatening our democracy, is violating so many of our most basic American principles. But still, you saw Biden at the White House with Trump able to acknowledge democracy has to come first, and we're not going to do what MAGA did last time and lie about the election for 4 years, try to overturn it, and all those sorts of things.
Right. That's why I think it's important on my show to have on the other side, so I'm not just seeing one opinion the whole time. All right, guys, we got Luke Beasley on today. Post-election, man, how you feeling?
Not as great as I was feeling before, to be honest. Yeah.
You thought she was going to win it?
I don't know what I believed. I've said before, I have a hard time deciphering between optimism and my actual prediction. I definitely knew Trump could win. I don't think I was expecting the electoral beating.
Right. It was
down.
landslide, right?
Yeah.
He won by like 100 votes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't expect that. I thought it'd be way closer. I thought some of the swing states would go her way.
Yeah.
And he won every single one, I believe.
Yep. All 7.
Which is crazy.
Crazy.
But you get in these bubbles when you're on social media, right?
Mm-hmm.
When like I log into Twitter and it's just all conservative stuff. So that's why I think it's important on my show to have on the other side, so I'm not just seeing one opinion the whole time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I was really proud of how, at large, you have your crazies always, but at large, how the Democratic coalition has responded, because we really do believe and stand by the fact that Trump is threatening our democracy, is violating so many of our most basic American principles. But still, you saw Biden at the White House with Trump able to acknowledge democracy has to come first, and we're not going to do what MAGA did last time and lie about the election for 4 years, try to overturn it, and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, it was cool to see that video of Biden and Trump together. They seemed like they were on better terms.
Yeah, I think Biden was just being the bigger man.
You think so?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. That imagery is not something Trump ever gave to Biden. If you remember, right when Trump lost the election, from that point to when he left begrudgingly on January 20th, 2021, he was working in allegedly illegal ways, like the fraudulent slate of electors scheme, to keep himself in power. And he was telling his followers, I'm not leaving office, it's not going to happen. And so to see Biden do what Trump could never is just another example of why we shouldn't have elected Trump.
I mean, I will agree that, yeah, I don't remember him with that transition doing the same thing to Biden.
No, I think Trump committed one of the greatest crimes against our democracy in American history.
You talking about the J6 incident?
A lot of people zero it down to that. That was sort of the culmination of weeks of him trying to overturn the election. So one thing that not enough people know about, but is critical, is, you know how him and Pence had that falling out?
Yeah.
That was over Trump wanting to get Pence to, instead of certifying, which is just the procedural role the vice president's supposed to engage in, the actual lawful electors, he was trying to get Pence to just take other random Republicans saying, we're the lawful electors from the swing states, and we say Trump won, which would have been a coup. Luckily, Pence said, I'm not doing that. And then Trump's followers chanted, hang Mike Pence. And to the day Trump left office, he was pretending like there was a chance he was going to stay in office beyond January 20th. That's how you completely collapse our democracy. So, again, going back to why I'm proud of my movement, is even in the face of someone who his own former chief of staff described as a fascist is victorious, we still preserve our democracy.
Yeah, I will say Mark Cuban congratulated him. I like that, seeing that. Obviously, he was very pro Kamala. You guys lost some subscribers when it happened, right? I saw Pac-Man talk about this.
Yeah, I'm happy we sounded the alarms. I'm happy we very quickly said, guys, if your reaction to this election result is detaching, that's how we get more results like this. So please stay engaged, however hopeless it can feel. But it did get a little bit overblown because within days we started seeing growth.
You got
again.
it back.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, he's still challenging that 2020 election, it seems like, you know.
Which I don't understand how anyone sees past that by itself, because any other issue, if you care about reproductive rights or the economy or crime, the way we address any of those issues is through our democratic process. We choose people who we think have the best ideas. And Trump says, no, I'm not going to engage thoughtfully in that process. I'm going to say that local officials should find votes for me when I lose elections. And the fact that we rewarded him for that behavior, now the federal cases are being dropped. The one election interference one has to be dropped because Trump's becoming president. And we're rewarding him for attacking the foundation of our democracy, which, again, we can get into why I think he won and why people get distracted from that most important issue. But it is a crying shame that we're allowing him to be rewarded for such behavior.
Yeah, it's been a while. And he was fighting that for years and nothing ever happened, right?
Dozens and dozens of court
didn't have
cases.
evidence to prove.
Yeah.
There was 81 million votes for Biden in that election. So I do see people on X right now saying, like, where did the 15 million votes go? Have you seen stuff like that?
Well, a big backlash election to Trump's pandemic handling. It makes sense there was more of a movement to elect the opposition then. But then once Biden and Harris were in power, now those pandemic issues that actually they were handling really well, but across the Western world, we've seen voters want to punish the incumbent parties for the handling of the pandemic. And just because it's hard to square in your brain that you could feel all this economic pain that's very real, but then also say it's being handled well by the party in power, which it definitely was. If you compare the data on how we've handled this to other countries, how we've handled it compared to the projections, how Biden handled it compared to Trump. But people wanted to blame Biden-Harris for that. And so there wasn't the same energy behind the Democratic coalition as there was behind Trump this time.
Right. I saw a lot of people blaming them, and they weren't really responding. I think that was an issue.
Blaming them on
the economy, like the gas, the groceries, and all that.
Yeah, it's a tough one to discuss. It's easier for me because I'm not running for an office, so I can be a little bit more blunt. People's feelings were wrong about who they were blaming. The facts don't align with saying Biden-Harris handled the pandemic conditions poorly. But that's not what Kamala Harris can't sit in an interview and say, well, y'all are just wrong, so haha. She has to sympathize. So she was trying to walk this line of saying, you know, if you look at the metrics, we're actually doing things pretty well, but I understand there's a lot to be done, and I have new ideas compared to Biden, so we're going to do even more than the pretty successful presidency that Biden's had. That message just didn't land because it's not as simple as they did it.
Right. Do you think she should have went on Rogan? Do you think that was a mistake?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
I like that.
That wouldn't have made the difference, but she should have, for sure.
Okay. Some people... No, go on.
Just a part of a broader issue with Democrats. Some of them are getting better, but they don't meet people where they are enough. And the facts favored Harris 100x. She had the facts on her side here. Unfortunately, the vibes, the economic vibes, and vibes about other things like crime when it's down, but people believe it's up, the vibes favored Trump. And so the only way you can shift people's vibe is not releasing studies on the effective handling of this, that, or the other thing, or papers about how crime has been plummeting at a pretty historic rate. You have to tap into people's feelings and connect with them. And the only way you can do that is if you're showing up everywhere. And while I thought Trump's appearances on Rogan and on Logan Paul and Andrew Schultz and all these different people's podcasts, from my perspective, he was all disoriented and had a hard time communicating. Still, he was showing up, and he was doing a lot of those things in places that people are not just your own base, but new voters who you could turn out. So that was a huge mistake for sure.
He was showing up and also being a human, humanizing with people.
Yeah, best that he can.
Like sometimes politicians give these political answers, which I understand they have to do, right? They got to put on appearance. But these days, I feel like people want that authentic feel. They want to see who they actually are.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we overstate how much Trump was connecting with people. I think a lot of this was whoever the Republican was going to benefit from the vibes, the anti-incumbent vibes, along with other things. But again, I have a hard time believing I know the fear-mongering works that Trump was doing, but it's not like he was nailing those interviews himself.
Yeah, on Rogan, he did seem a little all over the place. I'll admit that. I watched that episode.
Yeah.
But I really think the conservatives have like taken over alternative media, like the podcast space specifically, and YouTube, a lot of YouTube.
Yeah, there's a lot of, left of center voices, such as myself. You talk to David Pakman, Brian Tyler Cohen, and others. And we're building a pretty big block of an audience. But I think there's more of a direct relationship between right-wing media and right-wing leaders and then politicians who reinforce the messaging and show up and bolster the platforms of those people. Whereas we largely get ignored by the Democratic establishment, for example, and Democratic politicians, and they're still stuck in this headspace where mainstream media is the end-all be-all. And so I think a lot needs to change between now and the next election. One of the major things, it won't have to do with how we brand and how we adjust. Some of it will just be the structural stuff. Like I'm saying, no longer will people be blaming Biden-Harris for these pandemic conditions, but you also have to adjust where you can. And one of the things is we got to invest more in alternative media, like you said.
Absolutely. You got to adapt because traditional media numbers are dwindling year by year.
Yeah.
I just saw something where I think it was MSNBC is really struggling. One of the big networks, you know.
A lot of post-election discontent among those viewers.
Yeah. You said something earlier. Crime is down. People think it's up. What is that based off of?
What is the disconnect, or what's the
like where those
down?
Where'd you get those numbers from? Where the crime rates were down? You said under Kamala and Biden.
Yeah, the FBI crime stats, sort of what we always use to.
Was that
crime.
compared to Trump's presidency, or what was that compared to?
So crime now is down to pre-pandemic levels, or even lower, and like homicide rates have gotten extremely low, and so people feel less safe, but they're actually, by many metrics, safer than they've been even going back before the Trump administration. But what happened was during the pandemic, I'd of course say Trump exacerbated the economic crisis, the public health crisis, the crime crisis, all by his lack of a serious and coherent response to the pandemic, something that even his own medical professionals have later spoken out against, saying that we could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives if he took this thing more seriously, more early. But even so, you had this end of Trump administration crime spike. Biden, Harris inherit that, right? So we had higher unemployment than when Trump came into office. That's what they had to inherit because of pandemic conditions and his handling. You had this public health thing they had to handle, and then crime was up. What was super infuriating was then immediately conservative voices jumped in saying the crime stuff is the problem of Biden-Harris. They created this, even though it predated them. Same thing with all these economic problems. And then, as much as Fox News in sort of the 2021, 2022 period liked to fearmonger about crime because it was up during that pandemic period, they never turned around and went, wow, it's so spectacular that it rapidly plummeted back to pre-pandemic levels. And a lot of that is very, again, structural, systemic. It was going to happen as we got the pandemic under control. It's why Trump should have taken getting the pandemic under control more seriously. But you do have to point to the record federal investments in public safety and law enforcement that happened under Biden-Harris as well. And they actually have, like passing the gun safety bill and some other things, taken active steps that can be contributing to these solid numbers. So this, among so many other issues, is one that if we're just talking about data, you have this really strong case for why Democrats should have been given another term in power, but it doesn't align with how a lot of people feel. And I think a lot of that is more complicated than what I'm about to say, but some of it comes down to the right-wing media echo chamber is really effective.
Yeah, because you said earlier the facts favored Harris in this election. So you just wanted her to be more vocal about the facts, basically.
Yeah, and she definitely was flawed, but she ran a pretty solid campaign given that she had to throw it all together in just a few months. But I don't know if the best messenger could have convinced people. We could have moved the needle, and I'm sure there's some scenario where we could have won. But seeing the overwhelming results makes me feel like it has to be something a little bit more, I keep coming back to this term, but structural.
Yeah. Do you think she was the right fit?
Yes, in the sense that it would have been there was so little time between when Biden decided he wasn't going to run anymore and the election that it made sense he'd go, all right, I'm the one who the voters chose, but the ticket's Biden-Harris, and so I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to my VP. She wasn't crowned, though. People act like there was some powerful group that got to select her. Biden just threw out the endorsement. Some people thought it was to sort of slight the Democratic establishment, saying, fine, but I'm going to pick my person. But however it went, she went, ooh, as the mosquito's attacking me, and won over the delegates, which that's how the law or the process works within these party infrastructures, and ended up becoming the nominee. And given that she was the VP, that was the smoothest way to make it happen in a few months. I do think so.
I have heard from conservatives that it wasn't Biden's choice to drop out or whatever. Like she kind of there was an overthrow, right? Mm-hmm. Have you heard that?
Yeah, I've heard that. definitely in the lead up to the election, didn't care about talking about that because it was sort of, she's the candidate now and she needed to win over Trump for sure.
Yeah.
And I didn't see this, oh, it's so anti-democratic when Biden was going to be the nominee, but he has every right to say, I'm not going to accept the nomination, and thus it's up in the air. So then, again, the procedures say that the delegates are just going to have to decide. And so Kamala started calling delegates and won the support of enough to become the nominee. So that wasn't sort of the coup that Trump would always describe it as. But did Pelosi or others strong-arm Biden? I don't know. We won't ever know what those private conversations were. I think Biden just came to terms with how bad polling looked. There was a report that we just recently learned of that said Biden got some polling map that said he would have gotten mopped, like even worse than Harris ended up. Just an absolute historic landslide was in the works. And so I think it was less so him being strong-armed because he could have charged through regardless of what people were saying. He had the delegates' support. But he realized my whole legacy is going to be holding on to power and losing it and potentially losing our democracy for it. Now, unfortunately, Harris ended up losing too. So.
How have you felt about some of Trump's recent hires? It's November 15th today, so he hasn't made all of them. You don't feel good about any of them?
Oh, no. I mean, okay, good. Let's see. Yes, I feel good based on my expectations. For example, Marco Rubio is not the most extreme person he could have chosen for Secretary of State. Mm-hmm. But for Attorney General, Matt Gaetz, if that ends up working out, I can't think of a worse person there. Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, frightening.
Why don't you like her there?
She has a long history of foreign policy views and Russian-aligned views that freak me out a lot.
Interesting. She's a former Democrat, right?
Yeah, she was always a strange one, though.
Did you have those views when she was a Democrat, though?
Yeah, I never liked her.
You never liked her?
Yeah.
Okay, that's respect if you had that view while she was still a Democrat.
Thank you. I also wasn't doing political commentary when she was like running for president, for example. So I don't have any, I never actually talked about her online. But I remember even when I was just keeping up with it, I didn't find her. I don't like accusing people of grifting. I like to believe even people that I find outrageously wrong or just wrong genuinely.
Yeah.
She does stink of grift, though.
Yeah, my hope is just if you're a political content creator, you try to stay as objective as possible. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because I think some people bring a little too many emotions involved and then it just sways their bias in one way.
Yeah.
You know?
It's in this environment, my goal, because my show is an opinion show, I'm sharing my opinion, is to make sure that facts come first. I demonstrate the facts properly and as objectively as I can, and then follow it with opinions.
Got it.
Because what's happening in our current political environment is people. It's less so that sort of the Trumpism effect is convincing people that Trump is right on everything, but more so convincing people that it's impossible to discern what fact is. And so a lot of people really are fine with the conclusion of, I don't know, we all sort of live in our own echo chambers. We all have our own version of the facts. Who really knows? Even though there are actual facts, we can know what is true. And sometimes things are verifiably false, often when they come out of Trump's mouth. And so making sure we don't lose sight of that, even as we all throw our opinions onto the facts, is super important.
Well, it's hard to find facts these days. There's so many false information everywhere. It's like, where are you finding these, you know?
Yeah, and I think I stand by with any of my criticisms of left-wing media. Doesn't take away from the fact that I think right now we're in a really wonky environment, unbalanced environment where, for example, people will dispute this, but taking as objective of a look as I can at it, there's no equivalent of Fox News on the left. Fox News goes further in their propaganda for Republicans than an MSNBC, for example, would ever go for Democrats. A good example of that is you haven't ever seen MSNBC have to pay $787.5 million for lying about an election so brazenly that even with our really strict laws around free speech, a defamation case was so threatening to Fox News. So with that being said, I think the MAGA echo chamber is worse. But one thing I've been voicing a lot as we are a little bit distressed right now is as a left of center media environment to not then just start trying to mirror MAGA and to still value facts and try to not descend in just the same exact bubble.
I'll push back on that a little bit because I think there are outlets that show Trump in a very negative manner.
I think some people, I've seen people who have taken him out of context and stuff like that. But I think if you were to accurately report on him, you would have a very negative perception of him. To my previous point, just super objectively, find me an example of a president who loses an election in the United States and then tries to illegally keep himself in power. And the only thing standing in between him and holding on to power illegally is his vice president going, no, and then being outcasted from the party for it. That is not a matter of, oh, you're just so biased. That's just, do you have a basic respect for democracy? And the both sidesism of every issue makes it to where you can have a panel where some people go, oh, no, well, that's not that significant. No one really cares about that. Well, we should. And the facts point to a really dangerous man. And mainstream media, for example, a lot of people think that your liberal legacy media is too liberal. And I understand that a lot of the voices on those networks have a liberal bias. But actually, a CNN, for example, bends over backwards to prove they're not biased by creating this artificial neutrality, which isn't really what we're seeking. Objectivity is good, but neutrality is a little silly because some issues aren't neutral.
Right.
And they end up both sidesing issues that aren't both sidesable, like Harris versus Trump's respect for our democracy. I don't know if you know this, but Trump called for the termination of the Constitution on Truth Social.
I heard about that.
And that's something that I bring up incessantly because that's not really excusable. It's online. He hasn't deleted that post. And people look past it. How do you vote for someone who's going to take an oath to the Constitution when they've said, oh, because I think the election was stolen, I think we should terminate all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution? That's just not a matter of are you liberal or conservative. It's do you agree that our system of government is something that should be preserved? And I thought conservatives abided by that, but they've sort of abandoned it.
Yeah. I think he could have handled that incident better, but they were writing negative stuff about him way before that. You know what I mean?
Like when he said "ground by the P word"?
Yeah. I mean, that was the first one I remember, but there was a lot.
How would you tell a story about that in a non-negative way?
Well, not that specific moment. I mean, that's hard to defend, but just in general, like I think they've done analysis on what percentage articles are negative versus positive. And
yeah, I've seen that. I'm sure I've seen the graphic you're talking about. I remember Elon Musk posted a graphic and it was legacy media outlets, Harris, I think it was 88% positive,
Yep.
Trump 80, whatever, something high 80s or 90% negative. And I don't know what are the 10% of positives. I don't know how they're finding 10% positive stories for Trump. But I will say, no one ever includes in that calculus that if you go over to a much more influential network than any of the legacy media outlets, Fox News has a bigger reach than ABC or NBC or CNN, MSNBC, and no one ever does their analysis, which is 100% negative for Harris. And
you think so? It's 100?
Near, yeah.
She did go on Fox News. I thought that was an interesting choice for her.
She did. What do you think? I thought she did pretty well.
I thought she did horrible, dude.
Really?
You thought she did pretty well in what sense?
Because I've been willing to admit interviews for a lot of her vice presidency were her weak point. And she would just come off sort of unprepared or uncomfortable and then would just revert to talking points. There, she really held her ground. And I thought that a big criticism of her was what I was saying, that can she be commander-in-chief if she's not comfortable to go into the ring with difficult interviewers? And I thought she dispelled with that talking point because while, of course, there are going to be negative moments since it was a Fox News interview and they prepped it perfectly to try to get her on everything, she really had good responses to the border stuff, to the trans thing, to the economic questions. And I thought it showed her ability in off-the-script moments to handle oppositional interviews.
It was brave of her. I'll say that. I thought the interviewer could have been better. I thought he was cutting her off a lot.
Yeah.
I didn't like that. That's just like, I don't know, common courtesy.
Did you see the SNL skit?
No, I actually didn't.
It was really fun.
They were just cutting her off the SNL skit. Yeah, I thought he could have done better, but no, I thought I don't know.
What did you find negative about it? I'm curious.
Well, did they end it early? I think I remember it was cut early or something.
I don't remember.
It was supposed to be longer and her team cut it.
Maybe so.
But no, I just thought like it was just, like we said earlier, I want to see the real side of you. She was giving these answers that clearly were rehearsed, which is fine, but elaborate on that a little bit more. You know what I mean? It just felt like copy paste.
Maybe. I think we hold her to such a different standard than Trump. Some of this feels less relevant now that he's won because the comparison between the two of them is less relevant. But she'll go in, she'll get asked a question about a subject, and even if it's a prepared talking point, she addresses generally the subject. And then Trump gets asked any question, and he just starts saying they're coming from jails, they're coming from insane asylums, and repeats like 5 talking points. Whenever we are prepping for the show each day, whenever the campaign was going on, he would do all these different events. We'd be playing it out loud while we're working on other stuff. And, any question he's asked, I could throw out 3 different phrases that he's going to go to, and he would go to one of them. And often they're just him meandering and doing what he calls the weave, which is really just rambling. I think we never criticize, not we never, but folks who criticize Harris for not comprehensively enough or succinctly enough addressing certain questions never put that on Trump, when it's difficult to find an example of him just directly and concisely answering questions.
Yeah, there are no examples I remember of him just clearly like talking about policies, for example. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you that for sure.
Yeah, and when he does, like the viral tariff moment I know you referenced earlier, they convey a true lack of understanding about the policies he's talking about, which is what frightens me, that Americans are so willing to vote for him when every time he's asked about policy, if he really does give it a go, it's like a child talking about policy.
Well, hopefully he could just make the right hires,
Yeah, which he's not doing.
You don't think Elon and Vivek were a good thing with Doge?
We'll have to see what they do, but the whole Elon-Trump alliance is giving me some major concern.
What concerns?
I think Elon, as he's shown in some of his past business ventures, can get unrealistic with what he believes possible, and I'm worried he's going to end up doing a goal of his, which is cutting trillions and trillions out of the budget, which I also would like us to be more fiscally responsible, which Democrats have a better history with that than Republicans do in terms of the debt, but not do so in a childlike way where we end up tanking the economy.
But wouldn't cutting these agencies that are inefficient help the economy?
Well, a lot of the agencies, I don't know which ones they're planning on just completely throwing out the window. I know I've heard like the Department of Education should just go completely. While there's inefficiencies and there's issues and improvements, again, it's this, I've always said that Republicans are a lot better at bumper sticker politics, things that fit nicely onto a bumper sticker and are simple and you can get your head around it real quickly. Whereas Democrats will spend too much time addressing the nuances and it just misses people completely. And so it does sound nice. These agencies are not working perfectly for us. Let's just throw them in the garbage can altogether, missing what the actual utilities are that they serve, even if not as effectively as we'd like.
I'm a fan of the Department of Education getting rid of it. How do you feel about that one?
No, I don't think we should.
You don't think so? Why?
We need to go in the other direction. We need to add more.
You went to public school, right?
Investments and effort into public schools, yeah.
You went to public school, though?
Yeah.
And what was your experience? You felt like it was a good experience?
I went to a really good public school, so I'll be transparent about that. I don't think it's representative of most public schools, but I had a great experience.
Okay. I had a pretty lackluster experience, I'd say, and I feel like most people would agree with that.
Yeah, so the solution is to
provide
work less hard to make
go
it?
back towards state powers for schools. That's what Trump wants.
Well, then I'm worried about the red states who have such worse education often. Like when you have these poorly run red states that would rather pass things on like trans issues or something than do anything to improve education, when you completely give up any federal support or federal initiatives to improve their education, it's just going to go even more in the dumps.
So you don't want states to have more power. You want the federal regulation to have more power than the states? Depends
on the issue. But on education, across the board, we need to be raising the bar. And so I think a federal approach, while education is mostly left of the states, and I see the benefits to that, we definitely need to nationally raise the standard and be more educationally effective.
I just feel like there's better things we could be teaching the kids that are coming up, man.
Yeah, how do you mean?
Just like, well, you went to a good school, so I don't know what you were learning, but a lot of the stuff I learned, I'm not using.
All gender theory.
They didn't teach that when I was in school.
No, I'm kidding.
But just like, I don't know, a revamp, or at least teach some stuff that makes sense, like how to pay taxes, how to run a business, stuff like that.
No, I'm with you on that.
I'm not asking for like crazy changes.
Yeah, I thought of that too. I don't know how you would do this. That's probably more on on a state by state or even locality
There we go.
basis I'm saying to realistically implement some of the things you're talking about. But to be clear, abolishing the Department of Education doesn't create good state governments to do the things we're talking about.
Fair.
I'm saying if realistically I wanted to try out some of the changes, yeah, probably I'd have a better chance lobbying my local school district or whatever. But I've really been baffled, even the school that I went to, on the time we'll spend on certain things and super high mathematics. And I didn't know a lot of the basics of finances and stuff out of high school. No,
I didn't learn how to pay taxes.
Yeah.
My first tax bill, I was like, what is this?
Totally.
Like, you know what I mean? And then I knew how to do pre-calc. When am I going to use pre-calc?
Yeah. Again, I don't know how that connects to gutting educational funding and stuff. But
Well, the Department of Education, don't they provide the academic agenda for these teachers to teach?
I guess sort of, but I think the types of changes you're talking about would come of more heightened interest in improving, federal level or not. Again, the federal government moves a little slow on these things. And my worry is sometimes I'll hear these interesting prescriptions to social or economic issues or whatever it might be, and the solution is to make it even less possible to achieve those, like let's just completely privatize education.
Fair enough. Where are you on the reproductive rights movement? Where do you stand on that?
Very pro reproductive rights.
You're pro. Mm-hmm. And Trump wants to give that power to the state, that decision, right?
Yeah, that's his position now. He's flipped around on it, but he's been super destructive with the justice he got in the Supreme Court. I did think that, I don't know what role it played, but I thought it was going to lead Harris to victory, not because that's the top issue for everyone, but because there really was this midterm phenomenon right after the overturning of Roe v. Wade where people were, really upset with that. And they correctly blamed the Republican Party for it. Since then, again, the memory can get abstracted pretty quickly for a lot of people. And all of a sudden, I've talked to people who blame Biden for it because he was president when it happened, or they, very confused. I heard one lady who said she voted for Trump because Trump says he's not going to sign a national abortion ban, and that's good because she believes in reproductive rights. I think people get a little disoriented on these things, but yeah, I think Trump should have been electorally punished. The Republican Party needs to be, because this has been a decades-long project to overturn Roe v. Wade. And then we need to do more work within the Democratic Party to make sure when we have unified control of the House, Senate, and White House again, we actually enshrine reproductive rights in the federal law. Because that's a justifiable bit of outrage from people who are pro-reproductive rights, but not that motivated to support Democrats because they feel like they already failed them not protecting that before.
Kamala, how do you think she handled the border stuff? That was a huge issue this election, right? The immigrants.
Yeah, Kamala.
We're
going to get it
Pac-Man
right.
corrected me on this already.
We're past the election, still can't get it. But yeah, I think she handled it the best that she could, meaning politically. Obviously on the policy, they should have started more actively and publicly and aggressively implementing or trying to policy on the issue. They did, I'll admit, they did slow walk. Now, right when Biden came into office, he proposed an immigration reform package, and Republicans were like, nah. So I do put a lot of blame on Republicans. And then it became even more clear when they shot down that border security bill that was just everything they'd want. It was crafted by a Republican senator. It became clear, oh, this is just an issue you like to fearmonger about. It's not really that you want to solve it. And federal legislation like that border security bill that Harris supported would have made a more systemic effort to address this longstanding issue as opposed to just what an executive can do. So it definitely is something Republicans shouldn't be getting all this political advantage from because of their record on it, and they never want to engage with the Biden administration. But I understand why people were upset by it, and the issues that are present, again, just to add a few caveats, shouldn't justify the insane dehumanization or the poisoning of the blood rhetoric from Trump and this crazy stuff. Separate from that, though, I do think Harris immediately took a better approach than Biden, which was not shying away from that issue and going after Republicans for it. And Trump gave her the perfect way to do it, which is the border security bill and him calling out Republicans saying, don't pass anything on the border because I want to run on it.
So that was true because I heard that. Mm-hmm. So he was calling people and telling them not to pass any bills.
Yeah, and the defense, if some people in your audience might be thinking, no, Sean, point out that it was a bad bill. A lot of people are misinformed on what the bill was. like, for example, when certain border crossing thresholds are hit, then an emergency power is given to the president where they can restrict the asylum process like no president has had the power to do. So then Trump took that and said, oh, they're allowing in completely freely that number of people, which wasn't what it said. A lot of people believe that's why it was a bad bill, or numerous other completely distorted things about it. It actually was a very conservative bill, too conservative for a lot of Democrats. But I was happy with that because we need to show people we're taking the issue seriously. Yes, we also want to promote and support and push back against the demonization of lawful immigration. And right now, the insane fear-mongering about undocumented immigration is actually now widening to just immigration generally. And, you know, some Republicans talking about taking away birthright citizenship. And so we have to do two things again, but nuance is really difficult in politics. And Trump's just really basic and historically sourced fear-mongering about people impacts people more viscerally, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But again, Harris, she was going to be hurt on the issue. It looks like it actually didn't hurt her, and she made a lot of inroads. The exit polls showed that people trusted her. I think it was like in the 40s of percentage, which is pretty good. It was like 40 something to 52 maybe, and 55 for Trump. That's a much smaller gap than it was before and than it was with Biden. So clearly her rhetoric made a difference, and her taking the issue seriously. I think the economy was the big thing, though.
Yeah, I think she could have addressed that more. I will say on the border stuff, a lot of the fear I was seeing with that was these people would get in and some of them would be able to vote. And I remember I had Harry Sisson on the show, and I asked him, like, before the election, like, are these illegal immigrants going to be able to vote? And he said no. And then you see this chart where all these states have no voter ID, and there's like 10 states. Did you see that chart?
There are no voter ID states, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, you have to identify yourself to get registered, and you go, and then if
When you
get
say
caught-
identify, what is that process though?
when you register to vote, you have to put one of your identifiers in.
So,
Driver's license down
so
there
if
or
you
something.
came here illegally, would you be able to vote though?
Then you wouldn't be able to vote.
You wouldn't be able
Right.
to.
Which is why every single time this is studied, the reason that I understand actually why people on the, not even voter ID, but I guess it's like physical photo ID as they want to take it a step further in some of the red states. The reason is because they're actually, I wasn't even familiar with this, honestly, because my experience is right when I turned 16, I got my driver's license. So if I ever need ID, that's the easiest thing ever. It's always in my pocket. A lot of people actually don't have any physical photo ID, surprisingly. I think it's like 10% of the US population. And so if you're gonna put this impediment where now they have to figure out and spend money to go to DMV, is it worth the hoop you're having them jump through for the security that it's implementing? And what you see is it actually is not preventing the type of fraud that people think that it would. We don't have that type of fraud in any notable way. And every single time this is studied, it's essentially 0% fraud. And so why induce more inconvenience when we should want people to exercise the right to vote if the elections are secure? And again, all evidence points to the fact they are.
Interesting. 0%.
Near zero. It's like point something, you know.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. I'm actually impressed with that. If that's true, I got to look into that.
Yeah, we have really, really good secure elections. There's still issues, but this is what's so infuriating about what Trump did. And again, we have to care. Facts matter. Just because Trump repeats something over and over doesn't make it any more true. He had the chance. He brought dozens of court cases. They all got slapped down. Silly. Rudy Giuliani laughed out of court over and over. Then you had all these recounts, audits. You had a forensic audit back in 2020 by the right-wing group. It was like it's called something, can't remember the name, but a right-wing group that got access to the Maricopa County count, and they also determined the Biden win was legitimate. Every single time you have Trump's own investigators, Ken Block was a guy who Trump's campaign was paying to try to find fraud. He's been speaking out saying, no, he's lying, not widespread voter fraud. And so at some point, you just have to acknowledge that he's been lying. And that is such a destructive lie because y'all will never know how it feels to be on this side where we have a more significant dedication to our democracy. So we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Even though it is kind of mind-boggling, just as an example, Elon Musk bought Twitter. Something I've been saying on the show is, imagine if George Soros, you know how the right's really concerned with George Soros, sometimes on things George Soros has nothing to do with, but if George Soros purchased Twitter and the reports were coming out that Soros was helping to censor stories that were bad for Harris, And then Soros started spending $1 million a day in a way that some election experts think was illegal to get people on this petition so that the Trump campaign could, or the America PAC could target them for voter outreach stuff. And if Soros were doing that and he had a platform leveraging it for Harris, that would be the biggest right-wing justification to say, see, it's stolen. But then Elon Musk does it. No one cares. There was a recent video of Elon Musk raising his hand when someone said, we need a Soros of the right. So they have sort of these conspiracies that then justify their own bad acts that we were never engaging in. And even with all of the things about this election that were mind-boggling and a landslide when Trump's a historically unpopular figure and all of it, we still respect enough because there's no evidence of outcome determinative fraud to say it's absolutely legitimate. And Biden has the character to bring Trump to the White House, and Harris concedes clearly, unequivocally, and Republicans just sort of go, all right, cool, yay, we're going to benefit from their dedication to our democracy. Yeah. We're going to accept the smooth transition of power, but we're not going to rethink at all our tax on democracy over the last few years.
Yeah, Elon bought Twitter, and yeah, he was conservative the past few years. But I would say previous social media platforms have always been under Democratic leadership, and Google is one of the biggest donors to the Democrats. So,
well, I'm not saying people have the ability to donate to candidates that they support if they're rich, but I'm saying you've never had someone purchase a platform and then overtly say, I'm wanting to get this person elected.
Okay.
And here's what I'm going to do. I'm using my platform and the enhanced reach I have because I own this platform to do anything I can to help get Trump elected. And Elon Musk just absurdly acting like if Harris wins, there's not going to be any more elections.
Yeah, he did strongly advocate for Trump. I'll agree with that. Yeah, I haven't seen I haven't seen Mark Zuckerberg, I guess, strongly backing it.
But again, I'm not saying that's proof of anything illegitimate about the election. I mean, unless the Pennsylvania $1 million a day thing was breaking voter laws, then he can be held accountable. But I'm not saying this was proof that anything was wrong about Trump winning other than me not wanting it to happen. My point is that they use much weaker arguments than the one I just made to justify the lies about Democratic wins. And the other thing is a big thing that I've been hearing from Republicans is you have to now admit we must be right about some stuff. Oh, look at the 70 plus million people who voted for Trump. See, the left, now it's time for you to admit you're wrong about these things. But whenever we get 81 million votes, it's, that's impossible, it's stolen, and they don't do any introspection. Yeah. So again, there's all these double standards that are infuriating. I always want to engage in introspection. I always want to try to figure out where I can be, sympathetic and figure out where people are coming from. But my fuse is getting shorter.
I feel that. Do you personally use X? I know Don Lemon just announced he's leaving. Do you still use it?
Yeah, I do. I'll keep using it.
Okay. I do like that they don't censor you on X.
They censor some people, but yeah.
Oh, they do?
Yeah. The story about I'm blanking on the particular one, but there was one that I think it was a Rolling Stone article broke about the Musk campaign coordinating with Trump to censor a particular story that was disadvantageous. But all platforms are going to have, their terms of service, and they have the right to enforce them. They're companies. You're signing up to use their platform, so they can do that. And then we can take issue with what their policies are and how they're enforcing them. Fine. I don't love when people equate that with governmental censorship, which is the real free speech thing. But I understand the magnitude of these platforms now. And so in the court of public opinion, we need to hold people accountable for unjust terms of service or whatever. But yeah, I know conservatives like X more now.
I mean, you saw Trump get banned almost everywhere on social media. Remember that?
I do.
Facebook, Instagram, I think YouTube even, and Twitter at the time, right? Twitter at the time. So
yeah, that was a tough one.
What do you think of that whole, incident?
I understand, again, these private platforms going, wait, did we just give a platform to someone who incited an insurrection? Is it our responsibility to not allow that? But I also get how tenuous that can get and how you got to be really mindful of when you're taking especially someone that relevant and notable off of a platform. But Trump did violate their terms of service over and over and over again. So
I've had a few videos get deleted. Has that happened to you before on YouTube or anywhere?
Yeah. And again, sometimes I wonder what it's like to do what I see a lot of other, especially MAGA influencers do, framing it as an attack against them, the deep state, social media is trying to keep me down.
I actually did get a deep state video taken down, ironically enough.
Yeah. But when it happens to me, I'm just like, all right, well.
Yeah, I get it. A few of mine were like just topics that you couldn't talk about at the time. You know, it wasn't even me; it was the guest saying it. So I got
Yeah,
it.
that bothers me because I've been debating people, and the video will get
Oh,
whatever is it demonetized. Or one time I got a YouTube strike because I was covering a QAnon person and being like, "That's crazy," but they thought I was
damn.
espousing the QAnon stuff, and that was a bummer.
Have you debated Nick Fuentes yet?
No, I probably wouldn't.
Too extreme for you? Yeah, he wanted to come on the show. I kind of,
Yeah.
even for me, like I have on everyone, but that one, I don't know.
Yeah, I actually struggle with that because like we just had a Trump supporter on that's pretty fringe,
Who was it?
but Isabella Moody.
I don't know that one.
But so I don't know where the line is, honestly. My thing is, as long as I'm pushing back against it, I don't have a principle against debating Nick Fuentes. Just sometimes I think you have to be mindful of, are they benefiting way more from the exchange than your audience is, or than people out hearing the debate are? Is it valuable to argue basic tenets of like, is racism bad or something? Whatever Nick Fuentes would want to debate. Is that a valuable discussion? I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough. We'll leave those discussions on X.
Yeah.
Would you ever do those Jubilee 1-on-25s? Have you seen those?
Yeah, yeah.
Those are
I'd love
cool.
to. Yeah, that'd be cool.
I watched Destiny, Charlie Kirk. What do you think of Charlie Kirk, actually?
He's terrible
You don't like him? Why?
because he's really dishonest, and I think he misleads people professionally.
Dishonest in what sense, though?
Like, I keep going back to the election thing because it's one of the most black and white issues. He's perfectly fine convincing people of whatever Trump wants him to. And I think anyone who jumped on board that should be, like, we shouldn't forget that because of how consequential it is. And again, maybe this feels less relevant to someone who was on like the beneficial end of that, since we're never going to do it back to you and like have our democracy collapse. But it's really, really destructive. And you've seen in, history, it is a part of the authoritarian project to convince people that elections aren't fair unless your side wins. So it's really dangerous stuff.
Really? So that's happened in history? I haven't looked into that. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't understand. I honestly, like, for example, Trump also said the government should come down hard on MSNBC in a Truth Social post and called, media outlets criminals, and now he's suing CBS.
Yep.
And there's a few of these phrases, the termination of the Constitution one, the government should come down hard, the act of trying to assemble illegal electors, that I don't see how people just go, okay, cool. If he had gotten his way, he would have gotten a second term, even though he lost. That's not democracy. That would have been just our democracy collapsing. But because it didn't happen barely, because a few people who won't be there this time said we won't do it, I'm going to pretend like that never happened.
Are you going to go to the inauguration? I know you've been to some Trump rallies.
I guess, we'll be in D.C. still. So
It'd be good
why not?
content for
we'll
you,
be
right?
close. Yeah, talk to people, debate people.
You were at the rally he got shot at, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy. So
Yeah.
you heard everything? Mm-hmm. Wow.
It was wild. Yeah, really scary.
That is nuts. What are the chances of that? Do you go to a bunch of rallies normally?
We've stopped recently just because everything else was
Well,
going
it
so
ended,
crazy.
yeah.
Or I even mean like the final lead up to the election, it was just more, I enjoyed more just covering the rally from afar on the channel, and that was getting a lot of interest and stuff, so that was fine. But for a long time, we went to so many that statistically it makes sense that I was there.
How are you going to pivot your content now that the election's over, I guess?
It's probably not going to change a ton. I was thinking we had prepared more for Vice President Harris winning. And what I was really excited for was doing a show that wasn't so oppositional, and getting to dive more into the nuances of, all right, which Democrat, like whenever Biden, his first 2 years, had the House and Senate, a lot of the discussion right when I started my show was about what are like Manchin and Sinema doing to block the really good items in his agenda that I was excited about. And those discussions, they're not going to generate the same views, but I was totally ready for that. But now that Trump has won, while I hope he's not bad, we already have early signs that he's going to be about how I warned people he would be. So it is going to be a lot of the same type of content I've been doing, which is here's what Trump is up to, here's what the MAGA allies of his are up to, here's why I'm against it. And then a big thing in terms of the only I'm always doing this, but to call it a pivot, I guess is fair. I want to direct people more toward what my type of left of center politics are, because we divide our political discussions into right and left, and that's so oversimplified. I mean, tons of people on the right you'd think are terrible, tons of people on the left I think are terrible. And so I want to get better at establishing for people very clearly what it is that I think makes the movement I want to be a part of itself, like what characterizes it and what distinguishes it. Of course, it's clear what distinguishes it from MAGA, but what distinguishes it from sort of your right smack dab in the center and your further left than me, and how we can then mobilize those people who agree with my views to implement change. A big goal of mine is to not just talk about politics, and we're working right now to figure out how on the ground we can actually engage in voter outreach efforts and mobilize my audience to do so that at least next time, however the election goes, we don't feel like there were things that we could have been doing more.
I like that. Yeah, left versus right is way too oversimplified.
Yeah.
Where would you put yourself on a chart of like far left, far right? Like,
it's tough because it depends on what we're talking about.
Okay.
For example, some people would characterize universal health care as far left, even though every industrialized country has it. I don't find that as super far left. But then you also have the spectrum of where you are in like cultural issues. And so I would say that in a really oversimplified way, I'm probably like center, far left's over here, and then I'm like just left of center.
Okay. So in between center and far left.
Yeah.
So that's where I am on the right. I just took a test actually.
Yeah.
There's this really cool test. We'll put it in the description. But I didn't vote this election actually.
Wow, that's crazy.
I've never voted. Yeah.
What?
Crazy, right?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Why?
This time around, I wanted to, but Nevada, you had to like go to a specific spot. Even with the mail-ins, you had to go to a specific spot. So I was just, honestly, I was lazy.
You would have voted for Trump?
I would have.
Wow, that's crazy.
You think that's crazy?
Sean.
Why do you think that's crazy? I grew up Democrat. I grew up in New Jersey. My parents voted for Obama.
Yeah, they're so disappointed in you.
No, she. I don't want to put my mom on the spot, but like, you know.
No, I find it crazy because again, this is my point too. There are some people who, if you're not exactly where they are, you're terrible, right? You're the enemy. That's not how I think. There are a lot of people, you sort of saw sort of the Liz Cheney, Vice President Harris alliance that demonstrated politics is about disagreeing on policy. That's fine. It's totally fine. When it gets to the foundational stuff, it's not a matter of are we just ideologically different and we can totally still engage in our democratic process, because the foundation is our democratic process. And so Trump threatening that, as I keep coming back to, is inexcusable. And I wish more people who were committed to our constitutional process would value that more and say, okay, however I feel about Harris's proposal on the enhanced child tax credit or building more housing or whatever, I still understand that she's the only one who hasn't called for the termination of the Constitution.
Fair enough. But can you agree that the left is not what it used to be from when we were growing up? That has changed?
Always, yeah. There's been a bunch of shifts.
Because I feel like I haven't changed that much since I was a kid.
Yeah, but I think a lot of what you define the left as doesn't represent the people in power. Like, this is something a lot of people get confused about. Online, engagement sells. And so on both the right and the left, a lot of times extremism is overrepresented. So then how do we know? Okay, well, we could just both be strawmanning each other constantly. Well, I say look to people who actually have their hands on power, because then you see who's relevant with our political discourse and who represents enough people that they were able to be voted into power. And so what you see when you do that comparison is Biden, for example, governed in some ways pretty progressively, but I would say in a way that a lot of people find common sense if they dove into the policy of it. I don't think most people have an issue with his infrastructure bill. If you combine his infrastructure bill and his Inflation Reduction Act, it's adding zero net to the deficit. You have all these initiatives to both boost energy production while also pushing forward the green energy initiatives, but not doing so in a way that will jolt us. We're obviously producing record oil still under Biden, and the crime plummet as a product of certain investments and the macro trends, of course. the PACT Act, veterans benefits. Like his governance hasn't been super controversial, but Fox News would just collapse if they admitted that. So they have to stimulate a lot of things about, this random TikToker who, said this about some trans issue. That's what Biden's up to today when it doesn't actually represent it. And so you would say, well, how do you know that's not the same thing going on to the right? In a sense, it is. Like if anyone has ever said all Republicans are Nazis, they're probably consumed by unrepresentative extremist examples, right? Because all Republicans obviously aren't. A very small percentage would be. But the person in the highest position of power is the extremist that I'm talking about. Or Marjorie Taylor Greene is the extremist that I'm talking about. And so right now there's an extremism problem on both sides, but extremism is making it disproportionately into positions of power in the Republican Party compared to the Democratic Party.
Yeah, they did place a lot of spotlight on the trans issues this election, I noticed, especially in Cali, right? There was some bill passed there with trans kids in school, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's a big one. It's a provocative one for people. I don't like invalidating people's feelings in general, even though I do it a lot. But even though they're wrong about the economy and wrong about crime. But I would warn them that that's definitely one that's blown out of proportion. Like, people are convinced that that's a more relevant issue to their life than things that are so much more relevant, like structural economic things and democratic things. But on it, I think also that's another one Democrats should have better messaging on. Again, the nuance makes it a more complicated bumper sticker, but we can both respect people's rights and love people and support people's identities while also not being perceived as too extreme on issues like the trans sports issue.
Yeah, I never let politics get in the way of business for me.
Okay.
I send a lot of business to liberals, to Democrats. It doesn't matter to me. Do you let it affect your business?
My business is politics. Let me see. Do you mean
like would you
don't go to a store?
Would you enter a business partnership if someone was a conservative? 50-50 partnership?
Oh, it totally depends on like what it is.
Okay.
If they wanted to help with our show, no.
Okay, so if it relates to your political business, then no.
Yeah, because one of the things that makes, we have the guys who work for the show in the room with us, and one of the things that makes it so worthwhile is we all believe in what we're working on.
Okay.
The mission really fuels us. Because like the lead up to the election, it was the wee hours of the morning to the wee hours of the morning. Just
right, you're with them all day.
It was brutal. And what makes that doable is really believing that this is worthwhile and that it matters. So if I had someone who is managing the business stuff but didn't believe in the mission of it, I think it would make it less worthwhile for them and me as well. But then on a lot of things, like I have a lot of conservative. I grew up in Texas, so a lot of conservatives in my family, and that doesn't at all get in the way of our family relationship.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So no arguments at the Thanksgiving dinner table?
No, and well, some arguments, but no. Since I started doing this as a job, people really avoid talking about it.
I bet.
Because most people are just sort of going through their life. They have a few things that are on their mind, but if they bring it up, I'm going to be like, I have all these things that I've been thinking about all day that I want to barf at you. So they bring it up less, but I've gotten better too at not showing that in people's faces unless they want it to be. But I also, it's interesting, like when the first type of content that I got into doing was going to Trump rallies and interviewing people. And then even with the interviews I've done with Trump supporters, like in studios and stuff, I really find a lot of their views just reprehensible. But I also see that it's not a product of them, being evil or something. So it's interesting. I wish people could see, and we've shown this sometimes, but how we'll be debating. And it's not that there's like a genuine to non-genuine switch going on with the cameras, but it's just once you're no longer talking about politics, then I'm walking to them, out of the studio, and it's just super.
And you're friendly,
just
right?
like a really pleasant person, how you and I would be. And I hope more people can do that, but I see why on certain issues it feels like a line that can't be crossed.
I see that. No, Ben Shapiro has the same view. I saw him on George Shanko's podcast, and he was saying how within his media company, they have to share a certain view. That's why he axed Candace Owens.
Yeah.
So I could see that.
Yeah, and it really does. Because otherwise, the daily work can just, I don't want it to feel like just a 9 to 5, It feeling like a mission and a passion makes it all, the 9 to 5 feeling is gone.
Yeah, I could totally understand that. Well, Luke, it's been cool, man. I can't wait to do a part 2 with you one day. Where can people find you?
Luke Beasley on YouTube.
Perfect. We'll link it below.
Explicit podcast listeners, not explicit, but specifically just podcast listeners, we also have all that as a podcast.
Boom. I'm going to arrange some debates for you too.
Yeah.
I'll get Sneeko if you want.
That'd be awesome.
Let's do it.
I'd love to.